Howdy, and welcome to episode 125 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we discuss fine dining after the zombie apocalypse with author and culinary wizard Lauren Wilson. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jason.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Quick announcement before we get to our guest today. There are 6 episodes left in this season of In the Rabbit Hole. We will be having our season finale April 27th, and we will be returning after our summer hiatus August 3rd, 2015. Mark your calendars now. With the announcements wrapped up for the day, let's meet Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You are the author of The Art of Eating Through the Zombie Apocalypse.
I am.
I gotta say, I don't like slathering over authors, but I really this is amazing. So Jason first read your book and said, "I have a book you have to read," and I looked at it and I was like, "You're full of shit. This can't be any good. It's probably just going to be a few." Recipes with MREs here and there, and other than that, really, it's a cookbook dressed up to appeal to the zombie genre fans. But I opened it up, and I was immediately like, this book actually makes my physical bookshelf, which is a very special place to me. There's only a limited space there. There's a few marketing books that are treasured items of mine. There's a few famous authors that I've loved their books, and I have like autographed books, and then there's my survival shelf, and you made my survival shelf, and I think Jason even said you made his cooking shelf. Of physical books.
I'm the big foodie guy here, so when I read this, I was like, Aaron, you have to read this, man. This is food porn meets survival porn. He's like, what? I'm like, dude, you just don't understand. This thing's awesome. Here, read it.
So first, tell us about your journey here. You were saying you really weren't a survivalist when you started off.
No, I was not. I was predominantly a food nerd and a zombie nerd when I started out. And in fact, I have to give full credit where credit is due. The idea for the book was not even my own. My best friend, Paul, we were hanging out one day and he's like, yeah, you're a food nerd. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you're a zombie nerd. And I was like, yeah. He's like, you should write a cookbook for the zombie apocalypse. And I was like, oh my God, that's a great idea.
Oh my God. Thank him for me.
Yeah.
He is awesome.
I, tucked it away in the back of my head for a couple of years. And then when I moved to New York City from Canada, I had the opportunity to start working on it. I had some time. And so I sort of dived in. So it was his idea and I gave it life or unlife, as it were. So, in putting together the concept for the book, I mean, again, coming at it from like a pop culture perspective of loving zombies and then a professional cook aspect of just like thinking about the food landscape and what that would be like. I mean, it became clear to me right away, just sort of knowing the zombie geek landscape, that survival skills are a huge part of it. And there are a huge faction of survivalists who really enjoy the zombie genre. And so it became quite clear to me quite quickly that I needed to bone up on survival skills and understand how those could be applicable to food in the context of the zombie apocalypse. So
okay, I have to give you a compliment here.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Because I literally had zero skills to speak of when I started this book. So
see, that completely shocks the hell out of me. And I'm the food nerd here too. This thing nails the whole survival perspective. I have been literally mentally masturbating over the whole concept of, okay, the landscape, what's going on, what we're going to need for food. Okay, long-term prep. Okay, what are we going to do for, actual food production? What about foraging? What about hunting? All of that. That's my whole survival, genre right there. And all of a sudden I pick up this book and I'm like, shit, she already wrote my book. I mean, literally you nailed it. I mean, you cover... Not only do you cover the food very, very well and very entertaining, we'll get into the Twinkie trifle here in a minute. I was like, yeah, that's so awesome. You nailed the real fundamental basics of actual survival prep, making the stoves, how to start those, how to cook these items, when you run across it. That's all perfect survival stuff.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm so pleased to hear it.
So tell us about, I guess, let's start here. Tell us about your journey into zombies, because I am the lover of zombies here. Jason still thinks I'm a fool for loving zombies so much, but they are.
Do you know how many people watch The Walking Dead?
Yes.
Have you even watched The Walking Dead?
I actually watched, I think, season 2 or 3 or something like
that.
I kind of got into it, and I was like, forget it. I got better things to do.
Nah, I don't know how we're friends.
Because
Lauren, I want to talk to you. You be quiet. You tell me about zombies, lady. Tell me how you found all the wonderful goodness that is zombies.
Well, it all started when I was home for Christmas one year while I was in university. And my little brother, he's a couple of years younger than me, was having a sleepover with a friend, and they were playing video games. So like pop in, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? They're like, oh, we're playing this game called Resident Evil. So I sat down, watched them play, and like immediately became completely and totally hooked to this game. Like I literally spent my break playing this game nonstop, locking myself up at night in the dark by myself, just like scaring the crap out of myself with this game. I just loved it. And so from there, so then I was like, oh my God, zombies, this is a thing? What's going on? And so from there, I just sort of started branching into all aspects of zombie culture and getting really nerdy about it. But yeah, I have to say it was Resident Evil. That was what got me into zombies. And I think, Resident Evil to this day remains probably my favorite zombie game. Yeah.
Now, do you consider yourself a prepper or survivalist, or is it just, hey, I need these skills for the zombie apocalypse, so I picked them up, and I picked them up for work on the book?
I would say being self-deprecating or like just being sort of aware of myself as a person. I'm definitely more of a prepper than I've ever been. I went into it sort of acquiring the skills for that exact reason. I was like, okay, what skills would you need for the zombie apocalypse? But as I got deeper into it and I started attending some meetings of prepper networks here in New York City, it sort of occurred to me that, these are really valuable, practical skills to have. Like, whether or not you believe a zombie apocalypse would actually happen. I am in the camp that does not believe a zombie apocalypse would actually happen, but there are people out there who seriously entertain the idea. But regardless of whether or not you're surviving a zombie apocalypse, there are some skills that I think every person should have just for disaster preparedness of any sort. So I've definitely come to appreciate a lot of the skills I acquired from that context. And I'm like a baseline prepper. There are things that I think are really important that you should do and have ready and skills you should have. But again, I'm living within the constraints of being in New York City and not having a ton of space. Like if I had more space, I'd probably be storing a lot more stuff and doing a lot more other stuff. But yeah, so I'm a New York City prepper, I guess I would describe myself.
New York City. It makes me think of the, what is it, Pace Picante's commercial.
Cookie, get a rope.
Yeah, get a rope. And a Canadian. But, we were joking around about that beforehand. Like we, as Americans, we look at, in a horrible way, it's a horrible thing to say, but we look at Canada as like the 51st state. But we also think of y'all as y'all can go out and take down a moose and all this other stuff. But you were telling us it's actually a little different than that. Most people don't live out in the backwoods.
No. Some people do, but most people do not. But also, just as a side note, New York City is probably one of, I would say, the top 5 worst cities on the planet to be during a zombie apocalypse. Like, I really have little hope for myself surviving the zombie apocalypse, given the fact that
find a sailboat, sail to Texas. Done.
Yeah.
That's going to be a long sailing trip.
Hey, now tell us about your culinary journey. You give us some background on that so that we can come back to the actual book itself. I want to know how food became part of your life and how it brought you to this, and then how all of that kind of evolved into the whole foraging prepper thing and everything else.
Yeah, I guess it was kind of it's an interesting, long and twisted road, I suppose, to get to where I am now as a professional cook. But I grew up with an Italian family with a Sicilian grandmother, and food was just sort of very much part of the cultural day-to-day of my life. But I always had an appreciation of food, but went to university and did a business degree and worked in marketing for an environmental nonprofit for a couple of years before realizing that I wasn't all that happy. And at that point, I was like, wait a second, I want to get into food. And so I went to culinary school and then started working in the food industry, in kitchens and catering. And I've done a whole bunch of different things, writing a variety of things in the food world. And so that sort of shaped my professional career up to this point. And so from there, I just sort of was able, once I had that sort of culinary background, I was able to just apply all those skills to figuring out stuff for this book and thinking about the food landscape from that perspective. And of course, understanding, the tropes and the general story of a zombie apocalypse from the pop culture perspective. And sort of those two things kind of came together to shape the idea for the book.
That's awesome. The first thing that got me when I first opened the book was mise en place.
Uh-huh.
And only us chefs get that.
Yeah.
When I first read that, I was like, oh, she's real. And I started thumbing through it, and I started like just noticing how you had everything broken down, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good.
Well, now, my training, I went to culinary school in Toronto at a school that its foundations are basically French fundamentals. So that's where that sort of idea, that's where I learned about mise en place, and that's where that idea came from. But like, for those who don't know what mise en place means, it's basically just a fancy word for prep. I mean, you're getting everything ready that you need before you actually begin the process of cooking. And so I just applied that idea to getting yourself prepared for the zombie apocalypse and having a few basic tools that you could then use throughout your journeys in fighting the undead.
How did you research this book? I mean, you weren't originally per se a real prepper. You just kind of started getting into it. Well, what was that evolution preparing for the book?
As my editor likes to say, I researched the hell out of this book. It was a lot of research. It was a lot of talking to people and experts and interviews. It was I thankfully and luckily had outdoor backyard space in New York. So I was able to sort of get out there and practice starting fires and, do all of these things and put together this, like, I have a recipe for like a potting mix that you can use to grow plants. And so like doing all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, essentially, it just sort of evolved as I went along, as I sat down and thought, okay, so for this chapter, this is the context, this is the scenario, this is what you would be doing, this would be the food available to you. What skills might you need in the absence of electricity, in the absence of a refrigerator, in the absence of a working stove or oven? How would you go about doing the things that you would do, if you were holed up in your apartment, or if you were scavenging the wasteland, or if you were out in the wild, etc. And so just each chapter sort of banging it out, thinking about, okay, what skills do I need to learn? What skills would be useful? What tools would be useful? All of those things, and just sort of learning and going and talking to people as I went.
The layout that you did, another big compliment here, you actually laid it out in a time frame. So,
yes.
During an actual timeline, okay, this is what's going on in the world. Okay, this is what you're going to come across. Okay, this is what's going on in the world. Okay, you're running out of supplies, so you're going to need to tap into this, area.
Right.
It's perfect.
I tried to lay it out in this like kind of loose chronology of what might happen. So if you think about the initial outbreak, as it's often referred to,
right,
when sort of the shit hits the fan, initially you're going to be in your apartment. If you elect to not bug out immediately, you're stuck in your apartment or your house or what have you. And, the power's going to go out eventually. Whoever runs the power stations, they're going to be zombified. So you're going to have to figure out what to do with the stuff in your fridge. And then you're going to probably want to look through your cupboards. And then maybe once it's safe to go outside, you can sort of start looking around your immediate area for forageables and other things like that. And then, and sort of the evolution from there. Eventually, you're going to have to start moving around. You're going to be scavenging the wasteland and going through abandoned houses and grocery stores and all of those things. And then you're probably going to get into some, like, quote unquote, wild space at some point. And then what different foods are available to you there. One of my favorite chapters was definitely the army camp chapter with MREs. So if you find yourself in an army-run survival camp, which is a thing that's often talked about in zombie lore, and all they were feeding you were MREs, which, I mean, I'm sure you guys have had MREs before. If that's what you're eating day in and day out, it can become quite monotonous. So how can you go ahead and mix up the different components of MREs to make different dishes?
I love that chapter, by the way.
Yeah, that was definitely a very fun chapter because I didn't really know anything about MREs before getting into them, and they're so. I mean, the evolution of them and the development goes back many, many years. I mean, the MREs is sort of the iteration that exists now, but the development of technology to have shelf-stable food for like 10, 15, 20 years is really interesting and impressive. And granted, MREs maybe aren't the tastiest things in the world, but certainly the food science that's gone into them is really interesting and cool.
Oh, yeah. They've evolved quite a bit.
Yes.
My brother was in the military when I was like 8 or 9, and he would send stuff like that home to me. My 10-year-old brain was like, oh, this is so cool. Now that my palate has matured quite a bit, I go back to it and I'm just like, man, these have really come along a long way. This I can actually eat this.
Yeah.
You bringing the whole, okay, what do I got and what can I make concept to an MRE? I was so there with you. When I was reading through the chapter, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so earmarking this.
Yeah. It's fun. And now I have 2 cases of MREs sitting in my basement for when the zombie apocalypse happens. So
one of the interesting things I found about the book was not just that that typifies it, your creative use of something that already exists. And I think that maybe that speaks a lot to the fact that you are in a confined space, it being a prepper in New York, in that a lot of the stuff that's in your book is really geared towards urban survival, which, if you go back to most of the prepper survivalist books out there that are of any real value, they're very much you're lost in the woods. Here's how to survive for 3 years on eating tree bark and with nothing but a knife and everything else, and that's great. And for prepper geeks, that stuff is really cool. But you took a lot of that kind of bushcraft knowledge and really did apply it to, okay, here's how you would use this in an urban environment. And I mean, it still all applies to no matter where you are, but even all of it. And I mean, going back to the chronology of your holed up in an apartment all the way out to you're in an army camp, it was really, really quite impressive. Because and the other thing, to me, I've read, I think, almost all of the urban survival books that have come out, and they're all pretty awful, in my opinion. This is the first one where I looked at it and I was like, this actually, which I was joking, I have a friend that did the announcements for our show, and he's gotten really busy. He's a professional comedian, but he's in Brooklyn. And cool. He's always like, yeah, I'm totally screwed if the zombies rise. And I'm actually going to send him a copy of your book. I'm like, now here.
Oh, please do. That's awesome.
Now maybe you'll actually make it back to us in Texas and, to do the intros to the show again, because we're totally going to broadcast after the zombie apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, I really like that. And now going back for a second, you were talking about how much research you put into the book. How long did you actually spend? Because I was really impressed with the detail and how much stuff. Even, I mean, at the end of the day, you can only put so much information in one book.
Oh, yes.
and I can only imagine what the editing process was like, especially because you sound like a true just a good nerd. And I myself am a good nerd. And you have that, oh no, but they need this too. And you're like, no, I've got to cut that because the book cannot be the Encyclopedia Britannica. So tell us about that, Jerry. What was the research like and how long did that take you?
The research was extensive, as I said. And actually the book was literally twice as long as what was published. We had to cut out half. Like, I wrote a lot. And exactly. I mean, it's not a huge book, but it's a hefty little book. I would say it's a good weapon for like some zombie brain bashing if you had to do it. So there was lots of things cut out because yes, that's a good way of describing me. I am a good nerd. I wanted to be as thorough as possible. And there were so many things I'm like, but people should know that they can do this. But there's only so much you can do. So, but as far as the actual process of researching and how long it took, I mean, writing a book is a long process to begin with. It took me probably about a year just to flesh out the idea and then put together a solid outline and then write the proposal and find an agent and do all of that stuff. And then once I hooked up with my publisher, Ben Bella / SmartPop, I then had I think it was about 10, 11 months to write the book. But by that point, I had a really solid idea as to what the book would include. So then, that 10, 11 months was like the hardcore research period and the recipe writing and development and testing and all that stuff. So, yeah.
I'm going to put in a request now for a book 2 of cooking and shit hits the fan. I'm just putting it out there now. I'll be the first customer, whatever you need.
Well, my editor actually says, she's like, well, why don't we just cut this book in half and we can do a second book. And I was like, I don't know if I can do another zombie apocalypse book. I don't know if I have it in me. But hopefully actually a lot of that material could be repurposed and, put out in blog form or something. So
You know, it's funny. I work with a lot of authors, and it's always funny, right? As they're finishing a book, they're always like, I swear to God, I'm never going to write another book ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And I mean, like, these are professional, best-selling authors that have already like very accomplished, and it's like giving birth. It's like, no, I never want to ever do this again. I'm totally going to change careers. It's like, you've been a writer since you were 11. What are you talking about? But no, I get it. I definitely get it. It's wow. It is a long road to hoe writing a book. But that's really impressive. That, I mean, even in that amount of time that you were able to put in here what all is in this book. It's really quite fascinating. To back up once more for a second and go into the zombie stuff. You know, that's interesting. I really like zombies, but I haven't gotten crazy deep into zombies. I just really enjoy the genre. So, and I've never really looked deeply into kind of the hardcore zombie groups. I mean, I've always been in the more hardcore survivalist groups, I guess. And so it's interesting. I didn't know there were people out there that are really convinced that the zombie apocalypse is totally going to happen.
There are people that definitely make those claims. And I would say, from my experience of the hardcore zombie apocalypse believers, it's been mostly online. So, I mean, people might say, yeah, I totally think a zombie apocalypse can happen, but maybe not actually.
Okay.
But then there's people like me who, I'm like, well, no, I don't actually think. I mean, that said, so you can really geek out on the science of zombieism. I mean, if you look at kind of the landscape of zombie stories, there are a lot of different ways that zombies could come about. It could be a viral infection. I mean, there are even people who, especially like even in the last, this game called The Last of Us, that is an infection that comes through it's like a fungal type of infection. It's this parasitic fungal thing that sort of like takes over your brain and controls your actions. And that's actually based on a real thing that exists in the world. It exists in like ant populations.
Yeah. The zombie ant thing. Yeah. I forgot the name of the fungus. Yeah. But
yeah, in any event, all that to say, my point being that you can geek out about the science. And there are people who give there are neuroscientists who give sincere thought and have written books about how quote unquote zombies might be created through, real life things and real life medical conditions and all that kind of thing. So yeah, there are believers out there.
Yeah. She's a wealth of knowledge.
She is. I think, Jonathan, another friend of ours, we did that one time, I don't think we ever made it onto the show. Like we spent like weeks, like just drinking. It mostly involved drinking, I'll have to admit. Drinking and discussing like how would a real zombie. And I think ours came down to a prion that attacked the adrenal glands and caused overproduction and stuff like that. That was our theory. It was mostly vodka fueled. I will admit that now.
I mean, hey, that's completely fine. I think the best conversations happen when they're vodka fueled. But the prion thing is really interesting. The adrenal gland thing I had not thought about. That's an interesting one. I like it.
Yeah. All right.
Let's go back into some cooking.
All right. Yeah. So my favorite little section of yours is the whole urban foraging thing. When you got into this and you're researching this, being a true city dweller, how did this change your perspective on your environment?
Well, I mean, it completely opened my eyes to the fact that there are so many edibles, even growing in, dirty, gross New York City, that are, you walk by every day not even knowing they're there. And the research for this part of the book consisted of me going out on several foraging trips with a man named Steve Brell, Wildman Steve Brell, he goes by. And he does foraging tours in New York City parks. So he'll take you out to a park and he'll just sort of walk you through the park and say, okay, you could eat that. This is what this is. These are poisonous lookalikes that look like it. So be aware and all of these things. And so I did lots of trips with him. And yeah, I mean, it just totally opened my eyes to the edible landscape that's all around you that, most people don't even know is there.
Yeah. We've got a local guy here. He goes by Merriweather. It's Mark, and I can never pronounce his last name. And he's the one that really got us into that. And I grew up kind of, with the little survival kick Boy Scout thing. And so I knew some wild edibles, but then I started taking some of his classes because he's a local guy. And all of a sudden my mind just went boom. And then I started actually applying that to like, hey, okay, so how would you cook that to make it like restaurant quality? Because I mean, that's our big thing is as chefs, we're like, all right, well, I don't like that consistency. How do I cook it where I can get it softer, or the palate or the texture's better when you're eating it. And so I food geeked out all on this like dandelions and wild amaranth and all this other kind of crazy stuff. So when I started reading that section of your book, I'm like, oh my God, she gets it. I wonder if her eyes just got that much bigger whenever she was walking through a park now.
Yep, they absolutely do. They absolutely do. It's crazy. It's amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would still be very hard to feed yourself,
yes.
Strictly on forageables from a park or, any wild landscape. But
oh, yeah.
There's so much there that you just, you wouldn't even know. You'd look at this plant and you'd never imagine that it was like burdock. You'd look at that plant and you'd be like, what? That's edible? Okay.
Right?
Okay.
No doubt, right?
Yeah.
We have curly burdock here that is everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere.
Yep.
And I'm just like, oh my God, I've been like stepping on that all my life. And now I'm like, that would do really good sauteed up in some bacon.
Yeah,
everything's better with bacon.
You can treat burdock like a nice, like hearty green, like a chard or a kale or collards or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. So you talk about squirrel, tree rat. Tell me the journey on that one. Come on, because come on. Most people that grow up in a city, we automatically think of squirrel. We're thinking either rednecks or some guy, hicks or something. Tell me the perspective on that.
I mean, okay, so
I've eaten squirrel several times.
Squirrel was one of the things that one of the meats I was not able to actually source for recipe testing, so I ended up using rabbit meat instead.
Awesome.
I mean, that said, there are squirrels in New York City, obviously. I personally was not prepared to catch and kill one myself, which
that's a big step.
I mean, I struggled with it. I really did, because I tried to do as much hands-on, doing all of the things that I talk about in the book as much as I possibly could. But that was something where I was just like, I can't do it. And I'm actually a vegetarian right now. I wasn't at the time of writing the book, but even then I was just like, I can't do it. But squirrels are abundant. They're one of the animals that, unlike a raccoon, their diet is fairly clean. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think they would be probably kind of hard to hunt, especially for non-hunters, because they're quite skittish and stuff. But I think I talk about some strategies for getting past that in the book too.
Yeah.
But
actually, you do, and you do a really good job of it.
Oh, good. I don't like the idea of camping out. If where some squirrels are living, of camping out in their nest and being very still and just waiting for them to emerge in the morning and kind of ambushing them that way. But I mean, that is really a very practical way of going about doing it.
From a survival perspective, hey, look.
Exactly. No, exactly. And that's it. I mean, everything in this book is written from a survival perspective, where you are, strip away the zombies. It doesn't matter in any kind of extreme survival situation. You got to do what you got to do, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. We actually do have rabbits, and I remember the first time our first harvest. I grew up doing that kind of thing, but Aaron hadn't, and Aaron had this look on his face of like, "Damn, we're doing this, huh?
We're gonna kill the rabbits."
It wasn't just that. It was we had to sit down and kill a lot of rabbits that day, and so it was just this very long Dexter-esque process. And some of it was also testing different methods of dispatching with the rabbits, and some of them went as expected, some of them did not, and that was really the hard part for me, was where we were testing out different methods of ending the rabbits, and where they didn't go as planned, and those were a little upsetting, but yeah. But yeah, culling day is always, it's not necessarily hard anymore, but it's still not pleasant. And I think I would really not be okay with myself if I was ever truly okay with harvest day. So
yeah. But, we usually put it off until way too late.
Oh, it always ends up being late, and then we have these tough rabbits, and then it's like, oh God, why this rabbit's needs to be a stew. It's not. Yeah.
They all end up being broiler rabbits. We can't ever do fryer rabbits because they're just they haven't done anything to make us mad.
Yes,
they're just way too cute. We're like, oh, just let them hang out for another 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I always did fishing and did a little bit of hunting, but it was. But I've never really, I've enjoyed studying hunting throughout my life from an academic standpoint. Like you were saying a second ago, I've never had a deer that made me mad. So I've just, while I have pulled the trigger several times, I've never been one of those guys that's like, I want to go hunting. I'm more like, let me just take a picture of them. That's good enough.
Yeah.
I'd rather just kill paper. but terrible survivalist, I guess. But
it's all right, man. I'll feed you. That's all that matters. You'll be well fed, I promise.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I totally hear all the things that you're saying, because I think that for me personally, the only way, like I'm a vegetarian currently, and sort of the point I came to is the only way I would be okay with eating meat is if I'm willing to go out there and kill that animal. And I think that, not being okay with culling day it makes total sense. I think that you need to have some appreciation for the lives that you were taking. And then, and that's why, everything in the book is geared towards this idea of like, nose to tail, like you need to eat everything. You need to appreciate the fact that you're taking this life and then do the best that you can with consuming it.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that, girl. You're preaching right from my holy book of head to tail and appreciating everything in the world. Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. That is awesome.
Now, as a vegetarian, I got to ask, how have you wrestled with that as a prepper from a ability to take in enough calories in a day?
Mm-hmm. I have the privilege of being a vegetarian in, the normal context of everyday life. I think in a real extreme survival situation, that sort of goes out the door, and I would, do whatever I had to do to survive. And for me, that would include eating meat in some capacity, whether it's like, finding a can of Spam in some abandoned house, or having to go out and try to catch squirrels or rabbits or whatever.
Or the neighbor's cat, or the neighbor, I
don't know about, I don't know, but certainly, yeah. I mean, cannibalism is another thing that kind of gets touched upon a little bit in zombie pop culture, and I don't know that it's something I could ever do.
Yeah. My understanding is it tastes like pork.
Yes,
apparently it does. Yes, I've heard the same thing.
We do not taste like chicken, apparently.
No, we don't. I mean, that makes it a little more appealing.
It's like bacon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, bacon's delicious.
Right? Exactly. My only upside to that is I hate humans a lot more than I do pigs, so it wouldn't be as hard to harvest that. Just saying.
Fair point.
Okay, so as you're testing all of these recipes, what was your favorite?
Oh, geez.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I talked about really enjoying doing the MRE chapter. Those were some of my favorite recipes to write. And some of them turned out quite well. Like, again, with the base, like the MREs aren't terrible and disgusting, but they're not the greatest. I mean, they're shelf stable for 15 to 20 years because they go through this like extreme heat treatment process, and it sort of dulls everything, and the texture is never really great of any of the food. But those are some of my favorite recipes to write. I really enjoyed some of the recipes at the end of the book. So the last chapter in the book is sort of like trying to create a sustainable food system for yourself for the long haul. So you've made it through all the initial outbreak, and you've got yourself to a place where you can, sort of try to cobble together some form of day-to-day existence in a food system that would support you. And I actually had 3 scenarios in the book, but it had to get cut down to 1. So the one that I did include involves going to Damariscotta, Maine, mm-hmm. and growing oysters and mussels under docks and foraging for seaweed. And those recipes were really fun because I had experience cooking with seaweed, but not in the context of like foraging and what seaweeds were actually available out in Maine. And the seaweed I tested all the recipes with was from Maine. So that was really fun. And I have a kind of a seaweed spin on Bubble and Squeak, which is like an English sort of like fry up, sort of like toss everything in a pan. And that recipe actually turned out really, really deliciously. So
yeah, you have to start up a blog for this.
Yeah.
Come on.
Again, there's a lot of material.
Exactly. You can just keep giving me these little tidbits and little hints of all this other stuff that you've researched and you developed.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they are. And as a food geek, come on, share.
Yeah, totally. I would be absolutely happy to.
Now, one of the main or the big recipes in here that just totally kicked me off that I've actually already tried.
Yeah.
Made it myself. Twinkie trifle.
Twinkie trifle.
Twinkie is the epitome of, oh my God, this stuff is still around, shelf-stable food, right?
Yep.
When I read that, I was like, this is awesome. How did you come up with that? How many different ways did you test it?
Well, so Twinkies are one of those foods, along with Spam, that sort of have this reputation for, like zombies, never dying. So I think Twinkies are just one of those quintessential foods where it's like, yep, Twinkies will make it through an apocalypse. You could find a Twinkie years out, and it would probably still be completely edible. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do with Twinkies? What am I going to, like, how can, like, I mean, aside from just stuffing them in your face, which you could absolutely do, and most people probably would do in a survival situation, you come across a Twinkie, you're like, yes, done. But so then I was like, okay, so what other things might be out there that would be shelf stable and probably, useful? And so that's sort of how I cobbled together the idea for this Twinkie trifle, using like pudding packs, like those things I'm sure would have an extremely long shelf life. Yes. And marshmallow fluff, and canned pineapple juice, and jam, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it was sort of just geared from that place of like, okay, what else can you put with a Twinkie that has a really long shelf life that you might come across? Yeah.
One of the big things that I appreciate about all of your recipes is it appeals to my background of, all right, what all do I have and what can I make that's good? So every one of these is, okay, so you find this and you find this and you find this. Well, okay, if you have some of this, you can combine this, this, and this. And all of a sudden you have this incredibly delicious meal out of nothing. Out of
things that you would find scavenging the wasteland, as it were.
What all did you do to like actually come up with a lot of these?
It was just sort of sitting there and thinking about it and thinking, okay, like the Twinkie trifle recipe that comes in the chapter that is about scavenging the wasteland. So, let's imagine, if we're following the chronology of the book, you were in your apartment, you were holed up, now you're on the move, you're trying to, get to that survival camp you heard about, or you're just trying to find something to eat and you're just going through abandoned homes and office buildings and grocery stores and all these things. So it was just a matter of thinking like, okay, what would one conceivably find and how can you use those things? So yeah, it was just sort of context. What would be available? What could you do with them? And that was sort of what fueled. And I mean, the fact that I have a culinary background, obviously, it was just sort of like, okay, what could I do with this? What could I cook? And also, I tried to make the recipes. I tried to, like, especially for things like the foraging section, even stuff that you might find in your cupboard, I tried to make it, like, I didn't want to, I probably have a lot of stuff in my cupboard that most people don't have. So I didn't want to write recipes for ingredients that, the average person might not even know what the hell that is. And same for the forageables. I tried to include forageables that were available sort of across North America. So anyone reading the book would probably be able to find these plants. So yeah, that was a major factor in creating the recipes as well.
That's awesome. Now, since we have so many rabbits, and of course we have a lot of it still in our freezer, the all nuts crusted rabbit.
Yeah.
What'd you think of it?
So that recipe was actually really fun to execute because I went out and I foraged the nuts, and then I had to blanch the nuts and like get rid of all the tannins. And then make the recipe. And I was skeptical because I'd never worked with foraged nuts before. I mean, granted, I used acorns, so that was a nut, that I had never worked with or eaten before.
Isn't that amazing?
I don't know how this is going to turn out, but it was delicious. It was actually really good.
I really geeked out the first time that I actually went and foraged acorns. I was like, I remember playing with these as a kid, so on and so forth. As I got older, I was like, okay, the deer and everything, they all live off of this stuff. I wonder what it's like. And I actually made an acorn flour one time and I did muffins. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Too bad it's so much work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But in a survival situation, I mean, the work is totally worth it because in terms of calorie density and all that stuff and fats and all of that, they're invaluable survival foods, I think.
I completely and utterly agree. And I mean, acorns are so common, especially here. We have a big post oaks here. And so, I mean, they're literally all over the place. And as normal people of society, we just don't think of them as edible.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a giant oak tree in my front yard. And most of the time, I'm just irritated by it. So, yeah, and that's even somebody who looks at it and realizes it's food. But it's still just like, oh, God, these stupid acorns.
Aaron has 2 giant pecan trees in his backyard.
What?
Yes.
Awesome.
And they just dump on him. I mean, literally dump on him every year.
Wow.
And every time I walk up, I'm just like, so are you going to pick these up? He's like, hell no, I hate this shit.
Yeah, everybody always teases me. They come over and I'm like, yeah, I spent 1 year, I sat down and I only collected a little bit and sat on my back deck and ended up shelling all of it. And I think I have I want to say it's a 5-pound sack of shelled pecans that I'm so sick of pecans because I have these 2 giant mature pecan trees, and it just becomes more of a hassle because it's like you're walking through it and you got to kick them out of your way, or you go out into the backyard barefoot and the squirrels have partaken from it, and now you have cracked shells and you're stepping on it with bare feet, and it's like so it just becomes aggravation.
But in a survival situation, invaluable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I cry sometimes when I walk up to his backyard. Literally, it's you're walking on pecans to get to his back door.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like the whole ground is completely covered in crushed pecans.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a giant push broom because of it. Because it's just, and I'll just push them into a pile, and I just like I'll crack some of them. But for the most part, I'm terrible about it. I let most of them go to. I don't really let them go to waste. I leave them for the squirrels and the cats. And I say the cats because then the cats like to partake of the squirrel. So
and the tree rats
and the tree rats. Yeah, which those I take care of the tree rats. So which that does become a confusing thing because Houston we have what are properly tree rats and not just squirrels, which are the tree rats are actual rats, not just people like to refer to squirrels as tree rats. So, but anyway.
Yes, which I learned about in researching the book, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you did learn quite a bit about rats and all that other fun stuff.
That was one thing that I was shocked, and I know that you had to delve into a little bit, but like the rats, and you actually delve a little bit into mealworms and crickets.
Oh, yes.
Tell me how that little journey was, because even as chefs, we're still kind of.
So this is the thing. Most people in the Western world think about eating bugs and are like, "Ooh, that is disgusting. No, thank you." And I mean, you grasshoppers and things, like there's some bugs in some cuisines in like Mexico and stuff, but for the most part, we're not bug eaters. But a lot of people in the world are. And in fact, if you think about it from like a sustainability and an environmental perspective, bugs are really an excellent source of protein that take far less to produce in terms of resources than, cows and pigs and the other animals that we sort of depend on.
Agreed.
But, from a survival perspective, it's like, well, if you're hard up for protein and you're not a very proficient hunter, you're probably going to want to eat some bugs. So that's sort of where the idea for including bugs came. And then as I did more research and thought about it, and there is actually there's a movement in the world, in the Western world, to start producing bugs, and to try to encourage people to start eating bugs for that very reason. Mm-hmm. And they're not entirely disgusting. So the background on doing the bug recipes. So I did a bunch of research. I was like, okay, where am I going to get these bugs? And then I realized, okay, you can get bugs at a lot of pet stores. People feed bugs to their iguanas and their other pets and things. But those bugs are produced, en masse for non-human consumption. And you can get bugs that are produced for human consumption in cleaner conditions and, with more strict guidelines and all of those things. So I did the research, found the bugs, had to order the bugs online. I get a knock on the door. It's the UPS guy, and he's holding these boxes of live bugs, and he's like, I think there are bugs in here. And I was like, yeah, there are bugs in there. And he's like, I think they're alive. And I was like, yes, they are alive. And he just sort of like shoved the boxes at me. He's like, okay, you take these. I don't know why you're getting these delivered to your house, but So I took the bugs inside, and I had mealworms and crickets. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay. So now what do I do with these bugs? And thankfully, I have access to a freezer. And that is the most humane way to kill them, is just sort of put them in the freezer and they fall asleep and they die. And that's the end of it. So I loaded them into the freezer, just apologizing copious. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, but I'm going to eat you. So, this will all be worthwhile in the end. And then, a couple hours later, took them out and then did my recipe testing. And in fact, both mealworms, purposefully, I wanted to choose bugs that would be palatable to most people who have never eaten bugs, myself included. I had never cooked with or eaten bugs before. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go the safe route and do mealworms and crickets. And, they were entirely edible and not at all gross. And granted, in the book is a recipe for a mealworm fried rice. And that's a pretty easy one because the mealworms are mixed up with a whole bunch of other stuff and you sort of just can shove it in your face and not to think too much about it. And also mealworms themselves are sort of benign looking, like they just look like these little wormy things. They're not, not too creepy. But the crickets, the crickets, if you're squirmish, you can take off their heads and their legs and things, but I didn't before roasting them. So I had this bowl of roasted crickets looking at me in the face and like their little beady eyes staring up at me. And I was like, oh God, staring at these things. And like, I had to psych myself up to like, I had one in my hand and I was just looking at it. I was like, oh my God, just shut my eyes, shoved it in my face and ate it. And it was actually quite good. And they're when you roast hard shelled bugs like crickets, they get nice and crunchy and really only tasted like the stuff I had put on them. Yeah. So 2 easy, approachable bug recipes, I would say.
So now there is actually a place here in town that has mealworm soft tacos, and they are amazing. Like I ate them out of novelty, but I took a first bite and I was like, wow, these are actually really good. Now it's kind of a shishi restaurant, and so they're mostly doing it out of novelty, but they're actually really good. So now you brought up an interesting point about bugs took on mostly the flavor of what you put on them. And since it sounds like you've really researched this, how much with bugs does their flavor really come down to what you were feeding them before you ate them?
I think, well, it depends on the bug. So mealworms, I think, I mean, depending on what you do with them, if you like slather them and they're in some sauce, then you probably won't get much of their flavor. They don't have a very strong flavor, I would say. Like regardless of what you're feeding them, they're always going to have a little bit, like I find they have a little bit of a nuttiness to them.
Right.
But not a very strong flavor on their own at all. And I think the crickets, I just sort of covered them in a bunch of like, pretty strong tasting things. But for hard shelled bugs like crickets, grasshoppers, cicadas, they're sort of referred to as like I can't remember what it is, but something like the shrimp of the land. Like they tend to have, they're in that family with lobsters and shrimp, and they can have like sort of a shrimpy flavor to them. I think especially cicadas can. So I don't know if what you feed them will impact their flavor so much. I haven't raised bugs on my own, so I haven't really been able to experiment with that. But certainly bugs do have different flavors. And I think actually one bug I really want to try is honeybees, because I'm really curious about what they taste like. I think, well, depending on what stage of life you eat them too, like apparently the larvae are like quite sweet and kind of have a nice gentle flavor, whereas like the mature bees taste very different. So
I'd never even thought about that.
I never thought of that. Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. And yeah, the mealworms I ate were almost like peanut butter, but like a very subtle peanut butter kind of nutty taste to them.
Yep, exactly.
Not
mealworms
quite creamy,
are a good one because, I mean, you can also dry them out and grind them up and just like sprinkle them into things, without even actually having to deal with the physical bug if you're really squirmish. But yeah.
From your research, what other bugs are out there that you were like kind of interested in?
The honeybees I'm interested in, but at the same time, I mean, I have a really deep respect for bees. I love bees. I think they're amazing little creatures, and I think that they would probably be more valuable alive in a survival situation making honey than they would to eat them. I mean, that said, you probably could eat some if you had a good solid bee population. So I'm curious to taste those, even though I don't necessarily want to eat bees, but I'm curious about them. I'm curious about cicadas. Apparently they can be quite shrimpy. I haven't had the chance to try those. What other bugs were out there? Well, they're, earthworms. You could totally eat earthworms. I'm trying to think I have like an actual bug guide in the book that covers a whole bunch of bugs. Oh, termites. I haven't tasted termites, but those are edible. Ants are edible too. Specific kinds of ants. You don't want to eat like the fire ants, but
we have plenty of those here.
Apparently those taste like, because it's like they're mostly formic. I think it's formic acid. They have like a very vinegary kind of sour flavor to them, like an ammonia kind of thing going on with ants. So I'm curious to try those.
So now going back to your journey into survival and zombies, how nuts did everyone around you think you were?
Well, I don't know if they thought I was nuts so much as it was often hard to find people to taste the recipes when I was testing them, especially things like bugs. It's like, hey, you want to eat some bugs? No, I don't. Thanks. Don't pass on that. So, yeah. So, I mean, for most people, I would characterize the food in the book as survival cuisine. So, like, it's maybe not everybody's bag, but so yeah, not nuts so much, just as like, yeah, not so much. I'm not gonna help you eat the bugs.
Oh, that's too funny. As you went along, how much, after getting into it, how much of it jarred you how fragile things are, or how things that, as far as just survival, how much of it we take for granted every day?
Very much so. I mean, even living in New York City, like, we've had a couple of hurricanes since I've been here, and nothing major. And in fact, the area that I live was like virtually unaffected aside from like, heavy winds and tree fall and stuff like that. But it just made me realize personally how ill prepared I was, even for the most basic of emergency situations like a hurricane. Basic things like water and batteries and like canned foods and like, the most basic preparations that one could have, I did not have going into this. So yes, it certainly made me pause and think, okay, what are the skills that I should have, just basic skills and basic preparations. And thinking about, I mean, especially if you think, it's fun to think about an apocalyptic situation in the zombie context because you're thinking like, oh my God, they're monsters and this, like, it's it's a fun way to think about it. But, a lot of the things that we take for granted every day, like electricity, like your fridge working, like being able to turn on your stove to cook things. I mean, when you take those things away, most people are like, huh, well, now what do I do? So yeah, I think everyone needs to have a plan B. I think the modern conveniences of everyday life are so ingrained that we take everything for granted. We take the fact that we can just walk, down the street or get in our car and drive for a few minutes and get to a grocery store, and there's all our food laid out for us and neat shelves and nice lighting and, pleasantly arranged and all of these things. Like, I think we take a lot for granted in modern society.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My big thing is, kids nowadays just think meat comes from, in a package.
Well, yes,
cellophane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're so far removed from that. And that's, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this idea of your meat comes from an animal and there should be some understanding of that. But most people, it's like a cellophane package with, clear wrap and this pink thing in there. And like most people don't even really think like, oh, this was a living animal that was grown possibly in not great conditions or maybe in great conditions, but had to be killed. And you are now eating it. And it's like, it's not something people even really associate with. If meat is not something that most people even associate with animals anymore, which is kind of crazy.
I think it's quite sad. I mean, I've always respected the nature and everything around me. And to me, it's, if you're going to eat meat, you need to be able to take that animal and take it humanely and know how to break it down, because then you have a complete different perspective and different respect for the food that you're eating. Yep. Because you understand, what it was to take that animal. And what it was to break it down. When I first started, reintroducing that in my adult life, it really brought a whole new perspective to me. I think everyone should start moving more towards that direction. And that's part of our or at least my motivation with our little urban farm is, I know where this meat has come from. I know that these animals were very, very well taken care of, borderline spoiled.
No, they are full on spoiled.
So the guilt isn't nearly as bad. It's the human reaction of taking that animal is much more difficult for us, but it also makes us respect the animals and the food that we have. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I mean, we have a buck right now that he's in some disrepair, and even that he's actually our original buck.
Foundation, yeah.
Now he's just a pet, because I think we both kind of just signed away to, well, he can't function as a productive buck anymore, but he sure is sweet, and he likes to be scratched behind the ears, and so we had a recent argument of who was going to dispatch him, and then we finally, I think neither one of us said it. I think we both just kind of resigned to, he's a pet now. Yeah. So the dangers of having livestock on a farm. Some things do just become a pet. But what's interesting, I think, is the concept of being in touch with your food and understanding where everything comes from. And that's kind of a weird side effect, I think, for a lot of survivalists. Aside from that sudden, as soon as they get into it, that jolt of, oh my God, the grocery store may not be there tomorrow, or it could be full of zombies, one or the other. Yes, exactly. So it's tricky. So now, what does the future hold for you? What are your zombie survival cooking plans?
Well, at present, nothing specific. I don't have plans for another book or anything of that sort at present. Like we talked a little bit about this, the huge surplus of content I have from the book. So I'd like to get that into some kind of a blog format so that information can get out there and be shared, because it's basically work I've just already done. And, I teach cooking classes, so I'm going to continue to do that. and sort of take it one day at a time.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Lauren, we sure appreciate having you on the show.
It was my absolute pleasure, guys.
And I think we're gonna try to harangue you into coming back for season 5 for October, and maybe get some zombie party survival recipes out of you.
Most definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would be absolutely happy to.
Honest to God, I got the biggest kick out of reading your book. I mean, everything was awesome. It was laid out perfectly, and I can't believe that you were actually a new prepper.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. That's very, very nice to hear.
Well, Lauren, I sure appreciate it, and I think everybody should run out and get your book, whether you're a survivalist or just enjoy very entertaining cooking, The Art of Eating Through the Zombie Apocalypse, and we sure hope to see the rest of that content you had from the book.
I will keep you posted.
Please do.
Definitely.
And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
And with that, we wrap up episode 125 of In the Rabbit Holes Urban Survival Podcast. Don't forget, there are 6 episodes left in this season. The season finale will be April 27th, and we will return for season 5, August 3rd, 2015. Mark your calendars now. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.